everyone, and welcome today to Gerard the Dinosaur, the show where we go behind the scenes in the entertainment industry to talk about those who are rarely seen, and we get to talk about their experiences. Today we're talking to Timothy Romero, a programmer with a large portfolio in the industry, and we'll get to that later. Hi, Tim. Do you prefer Tim or Timothy?
Hi, John. I prefer to go by Tim.
Okay, cool. And you are a programmer, is that correct?
Yes, I've been working on games since 2012.
Okay, cool. There's, just because, I know there's, a lot of specificity. I interviewed this animator once, and he was, animation's kind of like a blanket, but there's, character animation, and then, models and stuff like that, and then there's rigging. So, what do you do? What is your programming role, so to speak?
I'd consider myself sort of a gameplay generalist at Nicholas, since it's an indie developer publisher. There's not a lot of programmers working on any given thing, so I sort of worked across every part of developing the games that I worked on there. I started out just porting the game Night Sky to iOS, and you would think that porting, you just make it run on there and maybe hook up some controls, but there's just so much that goes into it, just trying to make all the images fit in memory on the device. You might have to rearrange some sprite sheets or write some tools to run through all the folders and see what the biggest images are. There was a lot of work that went into actually changing the gameplay, so changing how you select objects to interact with, because it was initially just a PC game designed to be played completely with the arrow keys and 3 buttons, and we added all these different control schemes and different things. So I sort of touched a lot more parts of that game than you would expect.
Oh, yeah, now that you describe it, that's there's a lot more steps to that than I would have thought.
Yeah, and touch screen on the menus and all sorts of stuff. iOS is kind of a nightmare to try and port existing games to. Oof. Which is why when you get a game that's ported to iOS, it kind of feels a little second class compared to the things that are just made for it. Especially with the limitations of touch screens, where you have to put in touch buttons or joysticks, and it just doesn't work very well.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's been a lot of games lately that were really successful on PC that were, well, I wouldn't say really successful, but what's that one game? The one where the guy chases you around the house or whatever? Hello Neighbor, I think. That was.
Yeah, I haven't played that one, but I think I've seen it.
Yeah, it was ported to iOS, and I'm sure some people liked it, but it's weird, a game that's, you've got 3 different peripherals, you've got a screen, you've got a keyboard, you've got a mouse, and then suddenly you've got a phone, and the fact that you were able to do it, though, I think is really cool.
Yeah, and it was even more of a challenge trying to bring Binding of Isaac over.
Oh, wait, you also did... I thought you just did Rebirth. Oh, well, we'll get to that. We'll come back to that.
Well, Rebirth, yeah, but I just call it Binding of Isaac because that's easier to say.
Yeah. But I didn't... Oh my gosh.
That came out on iOS too.
Oh, geez. Okay, then. Well, let's just get into that. Let's just go now into that then. So you've worked on many projects. One of the projects you've worked on is, of course, now I've just said it, The Binding of Isaac. What was that like? Because, The Binding of Isaac is iconic. That basically doesn't need to be said. What did that feel like?
Yeah, I guess I can just sort of go through sort of the history of the project and how it went from beginning to release. So I wasn't there from the very beginning. It started out with, I believe, just Simon Parser and Adrian. I'm going to get his name horribly wrong because I don't actually know how to pronounce it, even though I've met the guy. It's Adrian Gavrilita or something like that.
Okay.
He's from Moldova, and Simon is from Austria. And they both worked remotely with Nicholas on sort of taking the Flash code of the original in ActionScript 2 and sort of just rewriting and translating the code into C++ to work with our 2D game engine that we created for 1001 Spikes and also for Binding of Isaac.
Okay.
And so my involvement started pretty much shortly after they had the game running on PC, just sort of taking the Mac port of the game engine and making sure the game ran on the Mac version of the engine, making sure render to texture and all that stuff worked. And after that, I just sort of dove directly into adding different items and abilities and interactions and some enemies eventually. And I've just worked on like hundreds of different like elements of that game as far as like gameplay, enemies, items, all those things. There's just so much stuff in that game that it's hard to wrap your head around all of it at once.
I can imagine, yeah. I still haven't, like, you know, I've probably played forever on it, but there's still so much that I feel there's left to do.
Yeah, my initial involvement with that, or my first experience with that game was playing the Flash version back when I was still in college. I got it in a Humble Bundle, and I probably played like half an hour or something, and I was like, this is hard. And I never would have guessed that I would have ended up working on the console and PC and iOS versions and all that.
But that's really cool, though. What a cool, like, you got to work on something that you thought was really cool. That's like a dream. That's like a... One day we all would like to be there.
Yeah, I think part of it is just once you've worked on something, it becomes a lot dearer to you than it was when you... compared to your first experience with it.
Yeah.
Like, I had never heard of 1001 Spikes before I started working on that, and now it's one of my favorite games, just because I had to spend the years with it and learn all about what makes it great. But I suppose I am lucky to have gotten to work on things that I actually have become endeared to, as opposed to just working on things that never grow on me and are always sort of like a drag.
True. But then, you know, even beyond the Binding of Isaac, you've gone on to... It's just gotten even more iconic. Like, after that, you made a Hat in Time, right? Or, like, you helped on a Hat in Time?
Yeah, my involvement with that one was pretty small.
You still helped, and that's amazing. Do you not feel amazed?
I mean, there was just, like... that. Let's see, when was the Kickstarter for that game? Do you remember?
A while ago, but I remember as soon as it came out, I was pumped. Let me Google it. I'm on my computer.
It's like 2013.
Yeah,
something
2013.
Like that game was in development for like 3 years, and I just came on in the last like 4 months or something like that.
That's a long time. 4 months of your life is a long time.
I suppose, yeah.
And you contributed, I would say, if you did anything that helped it be in its final release form, then you contributed to the game.
For sure, yeah.
And A Hat in Time is like one of my favorite games of all time, so that is fair. Is there anything that you particularly feel was special about like the time you spent on that project?
I don't know, it just seems like the things that I added were so minor and unimportant, at least in my mind. I mean, the biggest thing I contributed probably was the ability to dive while you're on the ground.
Okay, I'm not even gonna lie. I'm not just saying this to like appease the fact that you don't think you did a lot. That's one of my favorite things to do. I sometimes will like just dive continuously, like boink boink. Like that is one of the most fun things to do in the game.
Well, yeah. I'm not gonna deny that. I was just like playing the development version of it, and like I'm used to playing Mario games where you can just like run and push the crouch button and Mario dives. And then I was playing Hat in Time, and I pushed the crouch button while running, and she just crouches down on the ground and gets into the crawling animation. So I was like, I don't like this. Can I change this? And it took some convincing, but I managed to eventually convince Jonas, yeah, I can change this at the last minute.
Oh, so you made a major change.
Yeah, 2.5 years or something into the game's development. I'm like, hey, let's make a whole new movement mechanic.
Are you a fan of Mario games? Like,
yeah, I grew up on Nintendo games.
Cool. Did you play Odyssey?
Yeah, I played the crap out of Odyssey. I collected all the moons, got the 999 and every unique moon and everything.
I loved it. I love Odyssey. There must be an Odyssey 2 coming out soon.
We can hope, but I'm sure they're just going to do something completely different like they always do.
Yeah. Okay, so what's next in your Steam pipe? You did a Hat in Time. Is there anything exciting that you want to tell us about? What are you working on now?
So while I was working on A Hat in Time, I sort of used that as like an in-between, like transitional period while I was looking for full-time work because my stuff on Hat in Time was just part-time. Mm-hmm. So when I eventually did get someone to reach out to me and interview and eventually hire me, it was a contract with 343 Industries to work on animation tools for Halo Infinite. So that's what I've been working on since January of last year. So 14 months now.
And that's like the new one, right? Like that hasn't come out yet.
It is, yes.
I'm not a huge Halo junkie, but I know a tiny bit. I imagine a lot of those details are under wraps, so I won't dig for those. But that's very exciting. That's AAA, right?
Yeah, it was kind of surprising that recruiters sort of reached out to me, and then that I was actually able to get an interview and get hired on.
Okay, but I don't see it as so surprising because you have two of the biggest indie games under your belt. That is very impressive, in my opinion. I just need to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think the thing when you look at it from Microsoft perspective is like I've just been working on really small teams, and then it's transitioning to work on a team of literally hundreds of people on one of the biggest games ever built with like millions of lines of code. And the experience is transferable, but it's a difficult transition, you know? So I think from Microsoft's perspective, they'd rather hire someone who's worked on bigger games before as opposed to indie games. So that's part of why it's surprising to me.
And I guess without, having to give too much away, what is it like? What has your experience been like compared to Binding of Isaac and Hat in Time? Is the work experience good with hundreds of people?
Yeah, it's been a really welcoming environment. I think, from my understanding, there was a pretty major culture shift within 343's studio within like the year before I joined to put a real heavy investment in improving their tools. I don't know if you saw the trailer for Halo Infinite, but at the very end they put like a powered by Slipspace as the teaser for the new name for their engine. It's really sort of an extension of the code that drove older Halo games, but they just spent so much time invested in improving their tooling and making it easier to actually make Halo that they decided to just call it a new engine.
Well, like I said, it's very impressive, but I'll stop badgering. We'll leave that subject for now. Let's talk more about you and in general. So, when did you know that you wanted to be a programmer? How did you get into that? How did you, in general, just tell me you.
I think it's been a real gradual process. I can't pinpoint any specific moment where I was like, I want to make video games or I want to program. I think it was just sort of, I grew up around computers. Like when my brother and I were very young, my dad would buy my brother like Macintosh computers, and I would always be around him, like playing around in the Macintosh Paint app back in the black and white days. And when I was older, I would like play with ResEdit and like edit the image files in Mac games and things like that. And eventually, this is basically a really long story of me following in my brother's footsteps.
That's fine.
So when my brother was in high school, I want to say, he got interested in this Mac application called Confabulator, which was a widget program. it was basically the first widget program ever, and it sort of influenced Mac or Apple and Microsoft to both add widgets to their operating systems. So I don't know if you remember, like Windows Vista, I want to say, had that sidebar with all the widgets in it, and Mac OS X had a dashboard, I think it was called, where you could get little HTML-based widgets that you could open in it was like an overlay on top of the desktop or part of the app switching framework or something like that. So Confabulator, my brother got involved with that by just making widgets for it in JavaScript and XML. And so it was very simple programming. It didn't even have like proper inputs. The only things you could do were like just display information on screen, because it didn't even have an API for like mouse and keyboard. And eventually it sort of grew as it got more popular, more people bought it and added those things like inputs, and people started making games and things like that for it. And so I would just like I would download these widgets, I would open up their packages, I would look at the JavaScript source code and make little tweaks, maybe replace the images or change the layout in the XML, and just sort of try and understand how they worked. I was still young enough that I didn't really have a full grip on how the code that people were writing for these widgets worked, or how to write my own code for it. But I think part of just learning how to program is seeing something you don't understand, taking it apart and figuring out how it works, and eventually you'll learn how to make it yourself from scratch.
Well, that's really cool. I think I've always tried to like learn a language. I took a few CS classes, but it just never really stuck for me. I feel like you have to practice a lot with that, or you have to just keep going with it, and it would just kind of trail off for me.
Yeah. Part of the challenge, I think, is to find something that like you can get the source code for and can modify to do something new that interests you. But like that's so hard to do because so few things like let you look at their source code. The web is kind of a big revolution in that web page you can just see the JavaScript source code, and sometimes the developers will like obfuscate it just to make it harder for you. And there's also like open source games that you can look at and modify and things like that that are probably a good starting point, just depending on what you want to do and what interests you. Try and find something that you think is cool and that you have the ability to work on, and try and change it. So another thing you can do in that realm is modding. So it's not as big a thing now as it used to be, but there's still a lot of games that allow modding and have like their own scripting systems. And a lot of the time you can just download mods that other people have made and just look at the code for them and see how they work. And that's another way to sort of get into it and see how people do things. And then you can start making your own mods. And it's sort of a big source of developers finding people to work on their games is just their modding communities. Is they'll find someone who's really passionate about their game, who knows how their game works because they've modded it, and they'll just hire those people.
So what else in terms of that? So you've got modding, you've got editing like the source code. What else do you think would help like a programmer in training? Like what, or like for the game world, like what languages do you recommend most learning and stuff like that? What software? I'm not really familiar with the other technical software needed for your position, but like what is usually needed for your role?
So yeah, languages and tools. I wouldn't say that there's any specific one that I would recommend learning first, just because it's so individual about what, like the skills are very transferable once you've learned to program in one language. Programming in another is basically just like you look up a Hello World tutorial that sort of teaches you the syntax and sort of the constructs and ways of doing things that language does a little differently. But generally, it's the same. The code that you're writing works the same way. It's just different keys that you're hitting. It's usually structured very similarly too. It's just maybe this one doesn't have curly braces, or this one uses square brackets and named arguments instead of parentheses.
Well, let's move on from learning. Let's move on to some more fun stuff. You went to GDC, right?
Yeah, I went a couple times, but I didn't really get a lot out of it because I'm not a
Oh,
very social person.
oh,
Yeah, my understanding is that the people who actually get something out of GDC are the people who are able to like walk up to a group of people and just like join into their group and talk to people. And
was there
uh,
anything fun? Any like panels or speakers or anything that you got to at least listen to?
no, the panels at GDC are very expensive. So if you just get the expo pass, you're basically just walking around a show floor where people are trying to hire people and
Oh,
maybe handing out some resumes.
oh, that's
Yeah,
not fun. I guess E3 is the better of the two then.
yeah. E3 is much more focused on the games and marketing and things like that.
I've always wanted to go to E3. Everything's on the. I need to live in the West Coast. I need to fly away.
It's a little overrated because the news comes to you faster and more reliably if you're just watching E3 on like Twitch or your gaming news sites versus
True.
being on the show floor where you can only see what's directly in front of you. But you do get to play like 10 minutes of the hot new thing before it releases. So there's that.
And who doesn't love that, you know? Who doesn't love 10 minutes of the hot new game for, what are they, $500 passes?
I don't know exactly how much they cost because you get them for free if you work in the industry.
Oh, God! Okay, well, let's not talk about that anymore. That'll just make me sad. Okay. I feel like I'll just ask. What's something that, like, you feel like you've learned after being in the industry for the time that you've had, and, like, a piece of advice that you would give to someone else who would want to join the industry?
So sort of the mantra that I hear repeated most often is that you just need to make and finish your own games. Like they can be small things, but you just need to be able to show that you can take something to its completion. All the minor details that you don't think about as a player, like menus and game saving and all that stuff. Just get that into a game and show that you understand everything that goes into making and releasing a game that people can download and play on their own machines. And I guess working on teams as well. If you can get some people together to work on something a little bit bigger, that would be useful to show that you have that ability. But I would say my experience might be a little atypical because I just got hired straight out of school, and the only things I really had to show off were school projects. But
I'm sure your school projects were good if you got hired straight out of school.
Yeah. So I can get a bit into the story of how I got hired. So my brother and I are both big fans of the game Cave Story because that came out on Mac in a time where there were very few games on Mac. Mm-hmm. In fact, that time is still now. There are still very few games on Mac. And it was freeware. And so it got very popular among Mac players. And a long time after we played it, I remade the first couple levels of that game in the game Little Big Planet. Huh. And my brother also recreated Cave Story by porting the INX engine, which is like an open source version of the Cave Story game engine that someone made, just translating that code into JavaScript and making the game run in a web browser, and adding his own like renderer and audio system and input handling and everything. And he sent that to Daisuke Amaya, the original creator of Cave Story, saying, "Hey, is it okay if I release this?" And Daisuke, also known as Pixel, forwarded it on to Tyrone Rodriguez, sort of the creative director at Nicholas. And from there, they got in touch with each other and about possibly finishing it. And somehow it came up that Tyrone happened to be looking for a programmer, and I happened to have just graduated from college studying game programming.
That is a very crazy series of events.
Yeah,
How
but
cool.
like I was saying earlier about modding, it's pretty common for developers to just tap the community that is most interested in their games to actually work on their games.
Okay, so if you hear that, everybody, mod your games, or mod not your games. If you don't have games, mod everybody else's games. Except Bethesda's games, because do you still have to pay for those? I don't keep up with that.
I think they backtracked on that. Actually, I don't know anymore. I think they still did release a system for buying like officially sanctioned mods in like a re-release of Skyrim or Fallout or something like that. Yeah, I think they like did officially sanctioned mods for Fallout, but they just treat them like DLC basically.
Oh my goodness.
And you like have to be an approved developer for them and all this stuff or something like that. I don't know the specifics.
Okay. Well, I tried playing Skyrim once. Oh my gosh, I hope I probably shouldn't announce this on public air because everyone's gonna hate me, but I only made it like 2 hours into Skyrim and I stopped. I couldn't play the rest of it. Is that bad? That's really bad, isn't it?
It's not bad. It's not for everyone. No game has to be for everyone, right?
I guess.
I was just playing Sekiro and I got 3 hours in before I decided I had to stop. It was not for me. Like, I can see what's good about that game, and I wish that it were for me, because if it didn't have these like massive difficulty walls in the form of the bosses and the mini bosses, I would love to play it. Like, it's got a lot of stuff that I enjoy, like really fluid frame rate and responsive controls in combat. It's just the design is just too difficult and too frustrating for me.
Well, that's a shame. Everybody better play Super Mario Odyssey, though. That's a masterpiece. Shameless plug. Moving on. So, if I dare ask this because it almost feels like you reached it already. You're working with 343 Industries on literally a Halo game, but did you ever have like a dream, I guess? I feel like you answered that already too. You were like, you never knew that you wanted to be a game programmer ever. It just kind of naturally happened. But like, do you have like a goal somewhere that you're kind of trying to go to right now? Or is it all just kind of floating around right now?
Still just all sort of floating around. I'd like to someday be able to work on my own game ideas instead of working on the games that other people are making, like like every game that I've worked on so far.
Well, that'd be fun. I'm sure that based on everything I've heard so far, you probably have some really good ideas. What would you make? Would you make like a platformer, or like one of those narrative-based games, or what's your favorite? What's your ideal?
I have a lot of ideas floating around right now. The one that comes to mind is like golf in space, where your golf ball is a spaceship, and you can like control time forward and backward and try and create like orbital paths using your like thrusters as your strokes. So it's a little hard to explain, but
hold on. Hold on, I need to just process that. So you hit the golf ball, and the golf ball goes flying through the air, and then you like stop time.
So the golf ball, you hit it. Maybe you start on a planet, and it goes out into space, and then from there you can stop at any point and say, I want to hit it again, because like in space there is no like place where the ball lands and comes to a stop.
Okay.
So you just like wait until it gets to a place where you want to hit it from again, and then you change course to like try and get in orbit around the planet maybe. And then once you're in orbit, maybe you can change course again to go toward the moon, and maybe there's a hole on the moon that you have to land in.
Oh, that'd be neat, actually. That'd be really, really neat. Now that I can visualize it now. Yeah, that'd be really fun. I'd get that. Well, I'd say go for it. If you ever get there, and then I'll be your first Kickstarter. Or I won't be the actual Kickstarter. I will be the, what do you call them?
Packer.
Backer. Okay. Well, we're almost at the end here. One last thing that I like to ask everyone before we wrap is, do you have a favorite piece of media? Do you have a favorite game? Do you have a favorite film? Everyone usually gets really mad at me when I ask this because it's way too hard of a question, but I have to ask it anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with everyone else here. I'd say just across the board, it's Nintendo games, just because they're so polished and high quality and
that's fair.
Consistent in sort of being always different but always worth playing.
I like that. I don't know when this podcast is gonna go out because I still have to do editing and publishing and whatnot, but this will probably let everyone know when we recorded it. Yoshi's Crafted World came out yesterday, and I do plan on getting it, and I can't wait to play it.
Yeah, I played the demo for that. I'm still not sure if I'm going to play it yet, but I probably will just because it's Nintendo.
What does the gameplay even consist of? I'm not even...
It's like Yoshi's Island, except you can move... It's like a side-scroller, but you can also move in and out, like forward and backward, and... but it's only along like predetermined paths. It's a little hard to explain mechanically.
Oh, so is it like not a platformer?
You could still call it a platformer.
I guess I'll need to YouTube a demo of it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a demo on Switch too that you can play.
Shame on me for about to blindly buy it. In case you couldn't tell, I'm a huge 3D platformer buff. The year of A Hat in Time and Ukulele, I guess kind of Ukulele, was a good year for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember one of the driving motivations for Hat in Time coming out when it did was they wanted to make sure to come out before Mario Odyssey, just because they knew they would be totally eclipsed by Mario Odyssey if they came out afterward.
Yeah. But I'm glad they came out before because they were really, really, really good. And I hope they come out with more stuff. Well, do you have any last words that you'd want to say? Any last inspiring, motivational quotes? Any more games that you want to...
That's a lot of pressure. I guess I can plug the next Nicholas game that's coming out. It's called Crystal Crisis.
Okay.
It's a puzzle game with a similar sort of gameplay to the Super Puzzle Fighter games, and it looks like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Okay.
It's like a character mashup game with all these characters from Nicholas games, like Quote and Curly are in it, Isaac from Binding of Isaac is in it, 1001 Spike's characters are in it, and it looks like it's shaping up really well as far as the puzzle and competitive gameplay and everything.
Okay, so everyone make sure to keep your eyes out. That's it from me, basically. So, if that is all, then thank you all for listening. Tune in next time on Gerard the Dinosaur. I hope you all have a good day, and goodbye.